You're listening to The Disconnect, a podcast about anxiety and how it disconnects you from your normal self. We're here to share our journey and help you through yours to show you you're not alone. And now, your hosts, Austin Grant and Lindsay Jones. Welcome to episode 5 of The Disconnect. For those of you who have been following along with us, welcome back. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we're so glad that you're listening. In previous episodes thus far, we've covered what anxiety has looked like for us during our childhood and how it manifested into high school, what it looked like through college, and then our experience with anxiety once we graduated. And today we're going to talk about the times where we've both endured the worst bits of anxiety, and that ultimately leads to the why of why we just started to make this podcast and to start this journey with you all. So, hope you're ready.
As a general reminder, Austin and I are not medical professionals. As a disclaimer, nothing we say on the podcast should be taken as medical advice, and we always want to recommend seeking out professional medical help for any diagnosis or treatment. So I suppose that I'm going to start out with my story. My story goes back about 5 years now. I've been really struggling with how to tell my story for a couple different reasons. I don't by any means want anybody to think that their struggles are any less than mine just because of the things that I've personally been through. I just want everybody to know that all of their experiences are valid regardless of how you may feel that they match up to other people's. So in order to tell my story, I guess I have to kind of start at the beginning. In 2014, my mom passed away unexpectedly. It was not something that anybody anticipated was going to happen. She was just there 1 minute and gone the next. I won't go into horrible detail for that, but the months that followed after that were really, really hard for my family. We were always a really tight-knit family, and it was always just the four of us. So me, my mom, my brother, and my dad. And when we lost my mom, we really lost a major cornerstone of our family. And so it more or less tore my family apart with, I don't really have another way to say that, but it put a lot of pressure on me to grow up really fast, because none of us handled it very well. My dad ended up moving out about 2 months after my mom passed away. He met his now wife, who is wonderful. Deb, if you're listening, I really appreciate you. You've been really, really great for him. I know that we've all had our difficulties in the past, but I'm really glad you guys met each other when you did. And then him moving out kind of put the burden on me to watch after my brother, who's younger than me. He was still in high school at the time. I had just turned 21 like the week after she passed away. So I spent my 21st birthday planning a memorial service where a lot of other 21-year-olds were going to Vegas or, doing this and doing that. So it was a really, really difficult time in my life, and it's been something that I will forever have to carry with me.
So explain, a few episodes ago, we talked about how you transitioned from, full-time in person to full-time online and full-time working, and kind of where that fell into the timeline.
Yeah, so after she passed away, I was still working as a part-time student and going to school full-time, and I kind of had to put a lot of that on pause so I could get a full-time job. So I got a full-time job at the university and started having to pay bills and do all of those things relatively quickly after she'd passed away. And I really had to help my brother graduate high school. He was in a really, really dark place. And so I was kind of doing a lot of the groundwork in terms of just keeping him on track for a lot of things. He did graduate, which is really great. He ended up going to college, which is good. But during that time, I was still enrolled in full-time classes, and I kind of wish somebody had talked to me about that, because I totally would have taken a semester off, but for some reason, it never occurred to me that I could do that, and so I stayed enrolled full-time.
And what year in school were you again?
It was my junior year that she passed away, and I still had some time left, and I really, really messed up one of my semesters because I just couldn't handle all of it with the emotional side of it, and then trying to look after Jacob and trying to get him graduated. And so I tanked an entire semester. I got the worst GPA of my entire life and ended up having to go. That's the reason why I had to go a couple extra semesters. That in addition to kind of switching my major, defining my major pretty late in the game, really pushed that timeline out for me. So I didn't graduate with my bachelor's until 2017. So I had started in fall of 2011 and then went to summer of 2017 when I finally graduated. And it was really hard that entire time. Like, there were so many things that I had to do. Jacob and I moved a couple different times before we got to the place that we're in now. And it was just such an experience to have to grow up so fast and really deal with like the loss of your parent. And then, my dad had moved out when, a couple months after she'd passed away, and it was really hard to not have any of that support either. Like, he did what he could to support us from a distance, and I know that he was just doing what he needed to do for him. And now that I'm farther away from it, like we fought so much about all of those things, about him moving and everything like that. But like, looking back at it now, I know that it was probably the best thing for him. And so that was just kind of what led me to being able to help Austin with his anxiety, because I'd been, through this really world-shattering experience, and I had a little bit of perspective of what it means to be anxious and what it means to be depressed. Like, I was there are some really, really dark times in my past, and like, I somehow made it through it. I was talking to one of my friends today, and he was kind of asking me like how I made it through all of that time. And I think really for me, it was focusing on somebody who wasn't myself, really like looking outside of myself, because like internally I was such a disaster, but being able to kind of focus on helping Jacob and getting Jacob to where he is now, and helping us become stable and be in the place that we are now, and sticking with my job. And that really just got me through all of that, is not necessarily not dealing with it, but recognizing that there's a time and a place to be able to deal with everything. And while you're at work, you don't have to think about like all of the crap that's going on outside of work. You don't have to, think about the fact that, you might have to go home and figure out what you're going to do for dinner for two people when you're just now becoming like a fully formed human being. And so being able to really look outside myself gave me a lot of perspective on how to deal with anxiety. And then I was able to kind of use that to help my brother, because he was in a very dark place too, I know. And I had this thought one day of like, maybe if I tried to focus his attention on something else outside of himself, it would help him and be beneficial. And so we went and we got him a dog. And that really, really helped bring him out of that dark time, because, now you have like this living thing that you kind of have to focus on. And so that really helped him, in terms of getting back into a semblance of normalcy.
For all your dog lovers out there, just in case you're wondering, side tangent, Furry Friends Friday. Go ahead and DM us pictures of your four-legged furry friends, cats, rats, whatever floats your boat and helps you just go ahead and send us a picture and send us a little blurb on whether or not they hinder or help your anxiety. Yeah, sorry to go off on a tangent like
No,
that.
you're totally fine. I mean, there's something to be said for having an animal that's emotional support, or just having something to take care of, whether it's a goldfish or a lizard or a cat or a dog or something like that. Just being able to focus on something other than how you might be feeling in that particular moment, I think, is really helpful. So I personally love Furry Friends Friday, mostly because I get to see everybody else's fun furry creatures, or scaly creatures, I guess. And maybe we'll feature Jacob's dog on here on Furry Friends Friday. I'll have to get,
or his snake, or his lizards,
or
and
any of the
other.
many reptiles that live in my house. But in terms of like other things that resulted from the passing of my mom, like I kind of later became kind of a hypochondriac. She passed away from a blood clot, and so there was like this really long period of time where I was terrified that I would have some kind of blood clotting disorder, because I just kind of like her history. She'd had a blood clot when she was pregnant with my brother. My uncle had survived a blood clot, and then had, I guess, recently after she'd passed away, had another blood clot. And so it was around the time that he had experienced his second one that I realized I needed to bite the bullet and go talk to a medical professional to see if I had a blood clotting disorder. Because like there was a long period of time where I just didn't want to know. Strike me down now, because I don't want to know. I'd rather just go through life being ignorant about it. But then I realized, like, if I did that and I did have a disorder, then something would happen to me, and then what would happen to Jacob? Like, what would he do? And so I decided to finally bite the bullet and go. And thankfully I don't have a blood clotting disorder, but I'm glad I asked them. I'm glad I got checked, because it kind of puts your mind to ease for the rest of your existence. So yeah, so that's...
Do you ever have any doubts? You're like, did they do the blood test right? They take enough blood? And
yeah, I did.
You're like, oh, I got a sense of peace, but also...
Well, mostly...
Wait, what about the other... There's other blood panels.
Yeah,
what about those ones?
It's funny you say that, because there are different types of blood clotting disorders. And she just checked for the most common one. I guess the other ones are pretty rare. And so she was kind of explaining it to me. I'm not 100% sure of the specifics around it, but she said the chances of me having the really rare ones were basically none, and so it would be that I would have the common one and not the rare one. So that helps. So I don't know if I have the uncommon ones. I probably don't, but she checked for the most common one, and that really kind of set my mind at ease, because it's more common that I would be common than than not. So
before we dive into me and my wonderful story, so talk to us a little bit more about what it looked like doing full-time online, full-time work, full-time guardian / super sister / animal giver. Like, what did that look like, and how was your anxiety once you gave Jacob the dog, or once you, like, what did that do?
Well, a lot of my anxiety during that time was focused around just like learning the things that I didn't know how to do. Like, I'd never lived on my own at that point. Like I kind of said before, like, I decided to stay at home while I was in my undergrad. And so with that, I didn't really know, like, how do you pay a bill? How do you pay for a mortgage? How do you pay for rent? How do you pay for your water? And then, like, being able to really manage, like, going to work full time, doing school full time, and then making sure that, whoever you're taking care of is taken care of. And then still trying to manage to find time for yourself. It was all a really interesting time for me to learn how to juggle all that stuff. And so a lot of it really drove my anxiety, but a lot of it was related to, like, if I don't keep my job and I don't graduate, I can't get a better job so that we could be in a better space. And if I can't do that, then I can't help my brother. And so a lot of my anxiety was around money, and around like taking care of him for a majority of that time. I kind of really let my school fall by the wayside for a semester, and that was during like some of the hardest times where I was the most depressed. I was the most like having to help Jacob graduate. And like I don't necessarily regret it. I should have taken a semester off, but that's really where a majority of my anxiety came from at that time. And then not being able to kind of like I could ask my dad about how to do certain things, but like when you're missing half of your parental units, you really want to go to like the one that you're missing. So like for me, there are a lot of things where I'd like, oh man, I wish I could ask my mom that, or I wish I could, go talk to my mom about this thing, or just kind of see like how she managed it, because she managed a lot of the bills when we were kind of all living together. So a lot of like the bill maintenance I had no idea how to do, and I'd never really talked to her about it prior to that moment. I knew bits and pieces, but never really like the whole thing. So not being able to kind of talk to her about stuff like that was really hard. But yeah, that's probably where a majority of my anxiety came from.
So what were 3 things that you can think of off the top of your head that really helped you during that time when you were at your worst?
When I was at my worst, being mindful, I think, is a big one. So really paying attention to being in the moment. I kind of like I was saying before, like not focusing so much on yourself. So like if I was at work, I was focusing on being at work. I wasn't caring about the fact that like I maybe couldn't pay a bill, or maybe like didn't know what I was going to do for dinner, or didn't know what I was going to do for an assignment later, or didn't know if if the water was going to be on when I got home. I was solely focusing on work, and so it was a good time for me to just kind of have a reprieve from all of that, and not, because like there's nothing I can do while I'm at work, right? Like if they turn the water off, I can't do anything while I'm at work. If like I can't pay a bill because I just literally didn't have the money for it, there's nothing I could do in that moment. Like worrying about it didn't make it any better. It kind of like we were talking about in one of our previous episodes, it steals, worrying about something that's going to happen in the past steals from the moment that you're in. And so I really embraced that mindset of like, I'm just going to do what I have to do right in this moment, and I'll deal with things as they come, because that's really the only way I could kind of handle it at that moment. And then another thing is realizing that the only thing really that was going to make it better, like I tried to go to counseling, and for those of you out there who have a counselor and are set up with one and are trusting of them, like that is awesome. Like I kind of envy that, because I went to a couple different counselors, and it was just really, really not a good time for me. They were kind of more or less telling me how I should feel, and like I'm a pretty hard-headed, stubborn person. And so like having somebody sit across from me and say like, well, maybe you should feel this way, or maybe you should feel this other way. Like I know that there was suggestions, but it came across in that moment of them telling me how I should feel about my mom passing away, or about certain things I was going through. And I couldn't. I had like a huge issue with it. And it really felt like they were being dismissive of the way that I was feeling, because it didn't line up with how they thought I should be feeling. And so I only went to counseling a couple times. Like I couldn't stick with it. And so with that, I think like recognizing that the only thing that was really going to make it better outside of that was going to be the slow progression of time. I said something today, let me see. It was like, eventually you start thinking about it less, and then one day you forget to remember it. And it's because like when it first happens, or when you start first going through something, like, it's constantly on your mind. It's constantly in the forefront of everything that you're going through. Like, for me, it was the reason why I had to work full time. It was the reason why I was depressed. It was the reason why I had to take care of my brother. It was the reason why I was fighting with my dad all the time. And, like, the only thing that really helped was separating myself from that moment. And the only thing that could separate me was the march of time. Like, here I am 5 years later, and I'm relatively well adjusted. But it's because I stuck with it. Like, I, didn't kind of chicken out of my life, I guess. Like, I didn't let it own me.
Has your anxiety gone away?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I have had so much anxiety about doing this episode and talking about it, because it's a story that I haven't told in a long time, which kind of goes back to the you forget to remember it kind of thing. Like, it doesn't really come up anymore. Like, for me, when it first happened, it was, again, at the forefront of everything. And so every person I met, it felt like I kind of like owed them an explanation for why I was the way I was. And as I've gotten farther away from it, I realized that I don't owe them any kind of explanation, and they should only find out if I want to tell them. And so I just stopped telling the story to people. I just stopped, unless somebody asked or it came up in a conversation, I just stopped talking about it. And so then I just kind of, again, forgot to remember. And so when we started planning this episode and talking about how we were going to transition into the why of what we're doing, I knew that I needed to tell my story, and I needed to be open and honest about it and how difficult it was. Because, like, I want to be as honest and real as possible, because, like, lying about it does no good. But I had a lot of anxiety about how I was going to tell the story.
And then you met me.
Yeah, and then I met you, and you forced me to do all kinds of things that bring me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, so into my story, we're kind of shifting gears a little bit. I mean, for me, it like I said, it's kind of a different story. But, I mean, all in all, it's two prevalent things that are happening to people all over. And, I mean, like she was saying, we just wanted to be straight up front and tell it as it is, and, eventually get to the point of why are we doing this podcast. And so for me, as we discussed in the last episode, my anxiety post-college wasn't too intense. Transitioning into the workforce full-time was as expected. I knew I was starting a master's program, so kind of focused on that, started taking the 2 classes at a time. While working full-time, it was a little bit rough, so all the power to you for being able to do full-time school and full-time work, just because that, like, doesn't even seem possible. It's hard enough to balance time as it is. And so making the decision to split that up and taking one course every 8 weeks, it was a tough decision. I'd always been so go all my life, thinking that I had to get through school as quick as I can and move on to the next, and then the next and the next. And, I never, kind of like you were saying, like, oh, I wish I would have taken a semester off. I wish I would have taken a summer off to, graduate college and go travel or do something that's not, like, stressful or anything like that. And so making that decision to slow things down and basically extending my master's program from 1 year to 2 years was pretty difficult. And, I've always been critical of myself and pushed myself at a fast pace. And, I mean, making that decision, looking back on it now, I'm super happy that I did. Just because seeing how things went this past summer was like, wow, like, if I was in 2 classes, yikes, not good.
Well, I think I kind of noticed that you'd started to really exhibit those symptoms of being anxious. Like, I'm really in tune with how people feel around me. Like, I can kind of, like, read a room and kind of tell like, oh, you're uncomfortable or you're anxious or you're really happy or something. And so I started noticing that you were kind of being a lot more jittery and a lot more like flighty and couldn't really sit still. And I kind of noticed that you were getting a lot more anxious. And I think like it kind of dawned on me that maybe trying to fit into the societal mold of like, oh, you graduate from college, now you have to get a job, and then if you want to go get a master's degree, like you have to do it while you're working, because you don't really have an alternative unless you do like a GA-ship or something. And so I think I saw you kind of struggling against that mold of you didn't want to do full-time work and full-time school, which is totally valid, but I saw you kind of struggling through that. And so I think that's kind of when I started asking you like, hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?
And I think going back to like how I push myself at a fast pace, moving into that mold, being around coworkers and people in our office who, whether they're in my position or whether they're higher up, I mean, I was the youngest on the team. I was, and so in my mind, being so critical of myself, I was thinking and comparing myself to all these other people, thinking I have to get to that point. I have to get to the degree. I have to get this. And like I never slowed down to the point where I realized like, okay, I was 22 at the time. And it was just like kind of taking that moment to step back and acknowledging what I'm doing at this age, and it was really hard on me because I wasn't looking at it that way. I was looking at it at how am I viewed from other people in terms of how do I compete, so into the summer, I started feeling a little bit off in May. I wasn't sure, couldn't exactly figure out how to pinpoint it. Kind of a lot that happened in May. My girlfriend graduated college. My sister graduated high school. And I mean, in the middle of that, I had gone to a funeral for my uncle. And that was a really hard time for my whole family. And I mean, thinking back to that experience, all of that happening. And then it was my 23rd birthday. Like it was kind of a busy, crazy month. But specifically back to that funeral, I remember kind of sitting through it. I don't even know what had happened or what specifically led to that moment to where I was just like I felt like I couldn't sit still, through the service and everything. It was obviously a bunch of emotions running through, and it was a really sad time and super grateful to be there with my family and everything. But I remember, I think that was one of the times when I experienced like my first panic attack, in the sense of, I don't know, I just remember feeling like I couldn't sit still and like I started feeling nauseous and couldn't sit there and collect myself. I felt like I just had to get up and go. And so I walked it off, and I don't know, it was just a weird feeling. And I was just like, oh, maybe just wasn't feeling well, or, dehydrated or something. And so I really just brushed it off. But then like towards the end of May into June, when I got back up to Flagstaff, like I said, I mean, I could kind of sense, myself just being a little bit more anxious, not anything out of the ordinary or anything like I've done before. But I remember reaching out to the employee wellness office here to see what kind of services they offered, and talking to them, just maybe thinking, hey, while I'm at a spot right now where it's manageable and it's really not bad, might as well just see, what that process looks like in terms of going out and seeking some help or just talking to someone. And so I go in there, and it's, they're super nice, everything. And when it gets down talking to it, they're like, well, we got quite of a wait list right now, so the soonest, at least 6 to 8 weeks before you hear anything back in terms of something opening up. But, we'll give you a call. And I mean, it was basically here's a list of people in Flagstaff that you can try and reach out to and talk to. Some of them are accepting new patients. Most of them are not. And that was it. And I was like, well, I'm glad I didn't need it at that time, but it was just still like I remember just thinking, like, that really sucks. Like, how do people, like, get help like that, when they actually really need it, and so from there I was just like, okay, well, I'll get on the wait list and see how it goes. And like I said, at this time I was not, like, I was a little bit more anxious, but I was not to the point where I was like, okay, something's happening.
Do you think that putting you on a wait list made your anxiety worse?
A little bit, just because it was always to the point where knowing if something happened or if I really needed to talk to someone, I mean, they're always advertising the employee wellness or speaking with someone. And so not necessarily using it as a lifeline, but knowing in that moment, okay, well, if I had a crisis right now, like, I'm basically out of luck in terms of speaking with someone at the university. But the rest of, from what I can remember, the rest of June just went straight downhill from there. Like, completely downhill. So over summer, work was a little bit crazy and busy through June. We had the new student orientation, so those were a bit chaotic and hectic and stressful. And, at this point, I had done it so well the summer before, my first summer moving into the workforce and everything. But then for some reason this summer, things like that just started to become a little bit more difficult. At first, I just kind of brushed it off, just feeling like, oh, maybe I'm just, having an off day, off week or whatever. But those off days, off weeks turned into several weeks and months. And I was like, okay, what is happening? Like, this is not normal or this is not myself, and I started feeling so overwhelmed talking to these people. And ever since I started thinking back to that time of that like initial panic feeling, it kind of just started from there. I'd be at work and multiple things are going on at once, and whether it's taking a call or answering a question or just going through a bunch of different things. I tend to do that to myself all the time. I'm compartmentalizing so many different things at once, and it's like my body can't keep up, and I remember vividly, like, being at work, my heart is racing to the point where I have to, like, step out, and I'm like, I need to go outside. I don't know what is happening, but I think it might be a panic attack. And I've never had a panic attack, prior to the little instance in May. All my life of anxiety, I've heard people talking about the panic attacks, and to me it was just like, oh, like, some friends in college would always say they have some, and to me I was thankful and lucky to not ever have one like that. But then boom, all of a sudden, they started happening, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to do the little breathing technique on my watch that they have. It's like a built-in feature or whatever where it kind of calms and recenters your breathing. But for me, the more I think about it, the worse it gets. And so that didn't help at all. And I just remember being in that moment, like, I felt horrible. Like, I couldn't, like, my chest was tight, couldn't really breathe, heart was racing, and I had to somehow manage to collect myself, because at this point it was so early on that no one else really knew about it, and I couldn't really talk to anybody about it at that given time. When it really started happening, it was so new, and I felt like I couldn't bring it up at that point just because there was other things in the office that we were doing, and it wasn't, it wasn't a good time to be starting to have some issues like that. And then, from there, it went from happening, I'd say probably once or twice a week to like once or twice a day at work. And it was not, and once it started happening, the heart racing, and I start focusing, and you get so hyper focused on it, and it's to the point where, at least for me, if I'm focused on it, ain't no way I'm escaping that, and there's nothing I could have done to get out of that in that moment. And it was about that time, towards the end of June into July, that you and I kind of started chatting a little bit more about it. I don't remember exactly how I started talking to you about it. It was probably a time when you were asking me questions, and I was just like,
well, I think
no, I'm not okay.
I think I suggested that we go like talk after work, and we went to a little local coffee shop in town, and we just got like some tea because caffeine is bad for anxiety.
We'll get to that.
And so we both got tea and just kind of hung out and sat there and talked about it for like hours. And that was like the real beginning of me being able to kind of help you and use my past experiences to really coach you through what you were going through to the best of my ability. Like, I'm obviously not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor, but I have been through some for lack of a better word, I have been through some shit. And so being able to draw on those experiences kind of made going through all of that worth it, for me at least, because now I had this host of experiences that I could use to help you kind of go through what you were going through. And I think it was right around that time that we kind of started talking about doing the podcast.
Well, yeah, I mean, those conversations, at least for me, going home was always fine. Like getting off of work and going home, I knew I didn't have any like obligations. I didn't have to be anywhere. I didn't have to sit through a meeting. I didn't have to be on the phone call. I didn't have to sit with a customer where I had to maintain composure. I could kind of just be free and be myself. And so talking after each, it really became a daily thing for a couple weeks. And I mean, going from like a super hectic, crazy, chaotic day, and then just getting off and heading over to the coffee shop and just sipping tea and talking through things. And, you know, I was asking Lindsay questions, and she was giving me some advice on how she handled the things that she, like we said, I mean, hers was a couple years prior, and so it was kind of neat and cool to see how she went through an experience like that, didn't really have anybody to turn to, but here we are a couple years down the road. That experience was exactly what I needed to hear from her, and I needed someone like her and who's gone through that to really talk me through these situations and these things where I'm thinking, like, am I crazy for not being able to get through a work day without having a panic attack? Like, what's going on with me? Like, I started thinking something was wrong with me and I had done something. You know, the biggest question when this started happening is, why is this happening to me? I've been a Christian all my life, and I was praying. I was like sitting there like, God, what did I do? Why did you do this to me? You know, like, why now? Why did you do this to me? And it was so hard to understand. And honestly, that was the worst part. I was like, okay, it just started going downhill and then just avalanche down the mountain, and I had no idea why. It was just boom. Anxiety just turned the knob, max, full blown. And I mean, looking back, it's incredible to see where we've come. But yeah, those conversations were so vital. I mean, I'd leave those kind of calm and kind of just at total peace. We've talked through things. We've let it out. We've chatted, and I mean, granted, I'm sure the tea helped. Chamomile's great, and keep in mind, I have never been a tea person in my entire life. I was like, you know what? I don't think I could. Like 2 years ago, you couldn't catch me dead drinking tea. I was a coffeeholic, like 2-3 cups a day. Tea was gross. It makes my tongue feel weird, and it dries your mouth out, and it's just not. I'm just like, this just tastes like dishwater with like some plants in it. It's just like not something I was like really like, oh, I'm gonna go drink some tea. No,
I totally talked you into
I know you did.
tea.
And since the summer, I have at least a cup or two of tea a day. And yeah, but I mean, those coffee shop chats or, those long conversations after work were really what was keeping me through those tough months.
Well, I think a lot of it was, at least from my perspective, a lot of it that I was doing with you was just listening and validating how you were feeling. Like, anxiety can feel so incredibly isolating, and not being able to relate to other people who are feeling like perfectly fine with their lives, and then feeling like something is horribly wrong with you for feeling the way that you are feeling in that moment. And like, I mean, for me, like, mine was a little bit different, but I could still translate the stuff that I'd learned in my own journey into something that you could use. And I, that's that's really what I wanted to do, is I wanted to help you, because I saw how badly it was affecting you. And so, like, that's why I reached out, and that's why we had so many conversations, is because I felt bad that you were going through something that I knew, like, I know in my soul what that feels like, and I don't wish that upon my worst enemy. Like, it's really hard to go through something like that. And so I really just wanted to validate how you were feeling and make you feel like you're less, you're not crazy for feeling the way that you're feeling. And it's totally valid. All different journeys are valid, whether your anxiety starts because you go through a traumatic event, or whether your anxiety just comes out of nowhere, kind of like yours did. It's all valid. How you feel is always valid.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, looking back, we've had the conversation before, but when I was at my worst this summer, it seemed like for you were kind of going through a spot where you kind of got a grip on it, and you straight up, I mean, granted, the anxiety and stuff was there, but I mean, something that was really keeping me going was like, oh man, like, I want to be where she is now. I know, like I remember talking to you, I was like, is this going to take 5 years for me? Because I don't know if I can get through tomorrow. And
well, it's all a personal journey. Like, and you're right. I was, and I still am for the most part. Like, with the exception of, rehashing some stuff. Like, I had really bad anxiety about this episode. But for the most part, like, I'm okay. I finally made it to a point in my life where, like, anxiety doesn't really have a hold of me. I have a hold of it. And it is still going to be there forever, probably, until one day, I find a magical gypsy lamp and I can wish it away. But I don't let it control me. And that's another thing that I've really learned, and that I wanted to kind of pass on to you, is like, you can learn to control it. You can learn to, manage it in a healthy way. And, there is a light at the end of that tunnel.
Oh, and honestly, like, it sounds easy right now, but that was the hardest thing she was telling me that every single day. She's like, you got to stay mindful. You got to realize how you're feeling. And I was like, Lindsay, I don't even know I don't know who I am. Who is this being that's taken over my super outgoing, fun, loving, energetic, always down to go hang out and do things, and now what the heck happened to him, And for you to you telling me those things, I was like, Lindsay, that's great and all, but like, oh my gosh, guys, I have never been a patient person in my entire life, but this summer, not at all. Like, I was like, okay, cool. It's been about 3 weeks now. Whenever we want to just, brush on past this, I'm down. I was praying every single day. I was like, all right, God, we done now? Cool. Not yet? Solid. Dope. Okay. And it was the hardest. I remember just coming to you and I was like, Lindsay, just like sitting there with my face into my hands. And I was just like, how am I going to get through this? And I mean, you just talked me through a ton of things. And I mean, there's a number of different things that we have both talked about, established, and things that we've done that have just completely night and day changed my life. I mean, here we are drinking tea, recording podcast. Tea is a must-have in recording a podcast on anxiety.
Always.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's something nice now, and I just remember feeling, I was like, Lindsay, this is great and all. I love that you're like at a point where you're at your high, you're 5 years and you've got a grasp on this, but I am literally drowning.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it was so overwhelming, and I literally could not. It got to the point, like I said, it was happening 2-3 times a day, and it got to the point at work I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this. I don't know. August is our busiest month of the entire year, and that was absolutely terrifying. I was thinking, okay, if I can't get through these summer months where it's busy but it's not horrible, how on earth am I gonna get through the busiest time? And it was all this pre-anticipatory, like, chaos that's insinuated in my mind. And it was all, I mean, granted, it was all things I created in my mind. But in that moment, it was so real, and it, like, literally was debilitating.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, like, a lot of the stuff that we talked about, like, the reason why I repeated to you so often that, like, you can make it through this, you do have the ability to make it to the other side, is because a lot of the time, like, at least for me, like, when I'm at my worst, and my worst has gotten less bad over the years, but, like, when I'm at my worst, it's really hard to remember how far I've come, and, like, remembering, like, what you're capable of. And so a lot of the things that I was trying to remind you of is, like, you are capable of going through this. Like, you have made it through this time of the year before, right? You've done this thing 100 times, and you'll do it, hundreds of more times, maybe. But, like, being in those moments, it's really easy to forget your own inner strength. And so a lot of the things that I was telling you was, reminding you that you do have the ability to do this. And that's something that, like, I learned through my experience, is I had to remind myself, like, I do have the ability to do this. Like, I have to remember who I am, and, like, look at how far I've come. And that's something that still helps me to this day. Like, with this podcast and this specific episode, I'm referencing that a lot because it was probably the most recent experience with being anxious that I've had. But I had to keep reminding myself, like, no, you've told this story 100 times, and you'll probably tell it 100 more. And it's okay. It's okay to feel anxious about it. It's okay to, have apprehension around it, but you're going to do it. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to do it, and you're going to make it out the other side, and it's going to be fine. Like, just reminding yourself that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that you are capable of getting to that point.
Well, that was the hardest thing. It's like you said. I mean, this was going to be the fourth time or third time that I've done a fall peak, is what we call it. And in years before, I mean, I've always been a relatively confident kind of guy, and super go with the flow, and we'll just see what happens. And oh man, in those moments, I mean, Lindsay can back me on that. There was absolutely, like, my confidence was out the door, gone. Like, I, like, doubted myself every second of the day. I was just like, well, what if this happened? What am I going to do? And it was just, like, to the point where, like I said, guys, I mean, it was like I was a completely different person, like, going from something I've done, like, do on the daily every single day. These things are becoming the hardest to do, and I couldn't tell why. I don't know why, and it was just so hard to understand. And so, carrying into July, when it really started to affect my job and my ability to do my work and to get through the day, it was just like I don't know what to do. Like, I tried a number of, like, things to cope, and I mean, Lindsay and I were meeting every night, and it would help. I'd wake up in the morning, dread the day, get through work somehow, some way, suffer through it, and really just push through it. And then we'd go chat for 2.5-3 hours every night, and I'd feel better, but then go home, wake up, repeat, and it was just like, yikes, I couldn't escape it. And so at that point, it was around 4th of July. It was to the point where it was just that whole dreading the day ahead of you, and just becoming anxious about literally everything, and this like fear of, since I was having the panic attacks at work and everything, it started affecting other areas of my life. When I'm at the grocery store, what if that happens? And I'm in public and people are gonna see me, and that's weird, and that's gonna be embarrassing. And all the number of things just ran on and through the split second of my mind. It was to the point where I like it was so hard to get up and go anywhere. I just remember getting so consumed with those thoughts and feeling the lightheadedness or the tightness in my chest, and it's just like instant panic in those moments. And like there was no confidence at all of just like, oh, these are just anxiety symptoms. It's just like, oh, well, what if they're not? What if you're actually dying? And then it's just like consumed my thoughts. And so this was really tough. I stayed in a lot more. It was hard to get into work every day, and there were some days where I just couldn't do it, and I didn't really want to do anything. I didn't, it wasn't to the point where I was like super isolated or whatever, but it was to the point where I wasn't interested in doing the things that have brought me joy all my life, the playing the sports, even playing video games or things like that, watching movies. Sitting still to watch a movie was difficult. I was like, this is literally nothing stressful about it. It's fake. The things happening in Grey's Anatomy are fake. Nope, couldn't watch it at all. It was horrible. And I'm like, what is happening? Netflix is supposed to be an escape, and it was not. And so at that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, you know what? I got to try, this. At this point, we were dipping into that 6-week mark. I hadn't heard anything from the employee wellness place. So I took it upon myself and reached out to someone in town and took like a week and a half or 2 weeks to hear back from him. So keep in mind, I'm reaching out. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get help. And then a voicemail, it's just like, crap. Okay, cool. I'm just going to, keep getting through the next 2 weeks. Don't know how, but, and so it was around 4th of July. I finally heard back, and he's like, yeah, we can, the soonest I can get you in is the end of July 30th. And I was like, oh, great. It's July 4th. And so I've been dealing with this for a couple weeks, months, and now I have to wait 3 more weeks. And I just remember, like, Lindsay, I was like, oh my God, like I have it scheduled. I got it scheduled because I was like, I just need to do this. And I'm just going to schedule it, and it's going to happen. But then I was just like, how am I supposed to get through the next three weeks if I can't even get through today? Like, it's nice, like you said, going to the doctor, getting that, that test done. It was nice, having something scheduled. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I got 3 weeks from the initial appointment. Initial appointment's probably mainly just questions. How am I going to, open up the fire hose on this tiny little, this tiny little glass in terms of him asking me the questions? And it was just like all these thoughts running through my mind, 45 minutes after his voicemail saying we confirmed the appointment. I was just like so thinking, okay, what's next? Like, what if it doesn't work? What if this? What if that? And it was just like, I mean, I'm sure you remember, you probably just wanted to slap me upside the head and like,
no, never
give me some like NyQuil to knock me out or something.
No, it is hard, especially when you have kind of like benchmarks set for you for like things that you're kind of looking forward to. Like for me, when my mom first passed away, we were given these pamphlets that kind of had like the stages of grief in them. And so like reading those, you kind of like internalize like, okay, like what stage am I at now? And so like looking back on it, I can absolutely see like when I went through each of those stages. Like I definitely had like the whole anger thing. Like I was furious for a very long time. And like I just wanted to get to the acceptance point. Like I just wanted to be there, right? Like I didn't have any patience. I didn't want to go through I didn't want to go through the anger. I didn't want to go through the negotiating. I didn't want to go through the sad. I just wanted to go to the acceptance, right? Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Just send me straight to the acceptance, whatever.
Well, it's funny you say that because like in that analogy, when I'm sitting here talking to you, let's say, in those stage-wise, this summer when you were kind of at a good spot in terms of how you've handled it and how you've coped, it seems like you were climbing out of that tunnel. Mm-hmm. And, it seems like you were at step 5, 6, 7, and I was over here at like step -4. Mm-hmm. And I'm like we're talking, having these conversations. And I remember feeling like that. I was like, yeah, I don't want to, let's cut the crap. Let's cut the in-between steps. Let me just get to step 5 or wherever,
Mm-hmm.
What we were talking about at that time. And you're like, it takes time. And I was like, Lindsay, I don't have time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have patience. And it was so hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, I said it before.
So hard.
The only tried and true thing that will help is the slow march of time. 100% of the time. It's the only thing to help. Like you can, I guess not the only thing, like you could go and get, prescriptions and you could go and do all these things and that will help. But like really the only thing that's going to help you, the prescriptions just help make the flow of time easier. Like the longer you get away from that experience and you're going to experience it as you go on, the farther you get away from that initial feeling of like, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. And like the farther away from that you get, you just eventually you'll just forget to remember it, and then it'll dawn on you one day, be like, oh, I haven't had a panic attack in Lord knows how long, like you forget to flip your, it's been how many days without a panic attack chart, you just stop counting the days. And you just kind of lose track of it. And then you wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm actually doing all right. And so like getting to that point is really hard. Like that journey to that point is hard. And there's no way to sugarcoat it. There's no way to speed it up. You just got to stick with it and you got to trust in yourself and believe in yourself that you do have the ability to get there. You just have to give yourself some grace, have to give yourself some patience, and you have to go through it. And to your credit, I think you're doing really, really well with that. Like you having gone to see the counselor and having gone and done all those things, I think you're on your way. I wouldn't say that you're, at the end of that journey yet. Like you might
there's
think
never
you
going to
are.
be an end until die.
Yeah, until they stick those nails in your casket. But like, you will eventually get to the point of where you'll be like, wow, I haven't thought about being anxious in a long time. And of course it will always come back, you'll never get rid of it. It's part of the human condition, but, and I think you're well on your way to that. I don't think it'll take you 5 years, kind of what we were talking about before. Like it'll probably take you a couple years, but definitely not the 5 that it took me. But, it's all individual. It's all about who you are as a person and what you're specifically going through. And I think a big chunk of that is like, don't compare yourself to other people's journeys. Like for you, like you were seeing me and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm 5 years into this.
I was like, where do I sign?
Yeah.
How
and you're
do
like, I don't want to be 5 years.
Can I? Is there like
that.
a fast pass?
Yeah.
Oh, it was so hard.
And so like, just don't compare yourself to other people's journeys because your journey is your own.
Baby steps.
Yeah, baby steps.
We were saying that every single. I was like, Lindsay, I'm taking like toe steps. Mm-hmm. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, but like it's true. You have to.
Little progress is progress.
Yeah, you
100%.
You don't just you don't just, you're not born and you know how to run. You have to learn to crawl first. You have to learn to like, roll over first even.
Well, I mean, now that you think of it, in that moment when I was like, how in the heck am I going to get through these next 3 weeks before I can see this guy and start having him figure out how to fix me? I think it was during that time when I mean, you and I continued obviously to have those conversations every day after work. And if I remember correctly, I think it was during that time that we had just really emphasized the baby steps and said, hey, like, look, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, we're going to go through and be like, okay, tomorrow, your goal, just get up and get to work. That's it. Mm-hmm. No matter what else happens that day.
Oh, I forgot about that conversation.
You get up, you get yourself ready, you get to work, because that was something that was so hard to me, is finding just, I was like, oh, I don't want, just laying awake, and the worries and stressors about the day just start to flood in, and it was so debilitating that there were days I couldn't even get out of bed. And so through that, I started taking that mentality of just like, all right, let's just do this like day by day. This is my goal, and I'm trying to hit my goal, and that's it. No matter what else happens that day, no matter if I have 3 panic attacks, whatever, at least I got my goal, and that's a baby step. That's a step in the right direction. And I mean, obviously, I eventually got through those 3 weeks. They were by no means easy at all, and lots of herbal tea consumed and a lot of the good stuff. But ended up meeting with him and started things out, and oh man, I felt so bad. I felt like I was dumping like 5 gallons of water into a shot glass. That first time I met, I was just like, how do I begin to explain, and that's the hardest part. It's just like, oh, well, what if it doesn't work out? Hearing your experience, counselor, that's like freaking me out. I'm like, okay, what, so I'm trying this avenue. What if this doesn't work out? What, and then it's just like, shoot, that thing that I'm looking forward to for hope, if it doesn't work out, then I'm just back to square one, and so went through it, and it was, I mean, it honestly, looking back, it's changed my life. Like talking to someone and kind of getting that outside perspective on things. And I mean, it has been like, I'm so blessed to like have that and be able to go to them and talk to them. And I mean, it's to the point now where it's, it's just like, we're having those conversations now, and it's like kind of thinking back, I'm like, oh, well, I'm trying to, remember all what happened, because at that time it was so like, I felt like I could not get through that day, that week. And now it's incredible how far I've come. And I mean, the whole part in that moment, I mean, into August, I was telling him, I had my first session in July, like the end of July, and that was a couple weeks before it was getting super crazy at work. And oh man, it was so hard. It was to the point like I mean, I I had to take some time off of work. I was having panic attacks, and it was just not good. Work was stressing me out, and just, being out, and it was like driving was stressing me out. Driving for periods of time, and normally that's calming. You throw on some music, like that was something I physically could not do. Like, what if something happened if I had a panic attack when I'm driving? You're in a state where you can't escape. That feeling of not being able to escape, it was exactly what went through my mind every single second of the day. And I mean, in August, I took some time off. I took some time off and went home and kind of recollected myself. And it was definitely a much needed time to kind of get myself recentered and prepared for what was to come in the next few weeks at work. And yeah, I mean, my family's been super supportive of it all during this time, and they've understand where I'm coming from, and they know this is something that I've struggled with all my life. And so huge shout out and thanks to them for helping me through this time. But I mean, through that, I think one of the biggest things that I have done is that journaling every morning. I did, from the time I took the time off, I was like, you know what, I gotta start doing something different. I'm starting to see this counselor, and things seem to be kind of getting better, but still yikes. But just, with that, taking it back to when I'm sitting there asking God, I was like, what did I do? I'm sorry, like, can we take this away now? And it was so hard for me to deal with. And so during that time, I was just like, just getting more intentional with my relationship with him, and praying more, and like, it's something I've done my entire life. I'd probably describe my relationship up to that point as, pretty surface level Christian and surface level relationship at that point, where it's like, I know who he is and all that. But I mean, it wasn't until that point when I was just like, you know what, like, I started kind of like praying about it a little more, and I really felt like there was a breakthrough coming. Like, honestly, like, it was never, like, you're telling me, like, remember we talked about like trying some meditation, and so for me that's like prayer and stuff like that. And oh man, you I mean, you see me, I still can't sit still today, and I'm like less anxious than I was. But like during that time, like, you tell me to, okay, sit down, now just relax and ease your mind and take a deep breath. I'm like, is this over yet? Like, I could not do it. And so in those moments, starting every single morning with a devotion and some journaling where, I'm just simply writing out what's on my mind. And in my sense, that's how, kind of like you and I talked about, how we're, kind of releasing all the things that we're worried about. I mean, to me, I was writing it all down and I was giving it to God. And so you mentioned putting it in a box, you shut in that box and it's done.
Well,
you're not.
And I mean, that's one thing that helped me with mine, and kind of like I was talking about before, is not worrying about it while you're doing something else. So like while I was at work, before I would go to work, and it it kind of sounds ridiculous when you think about it from an outsider's perspective, but like for me, I would just kind of imagine myself having this box, and I would take all the things that I was worried about, and I would give them some kind of form, and I would physically in my mind, I would put them in the box, and then I would close the box, and I would send the box away, whatever that means, whether it means throwing it away from you as far as I could throw it, or like sending it down some proverbial river, or whatever I had to do with it, lighting it on fire.
I actually tried that a couple times. It worked in the moment, but then I was like, yep, it didn't work. And I remember sitting at the coffee shop, hearing you explain that to me, and you like you visually showed me. And I was like, Lindsay, this is great and all, but how? How can I do that?
Well, and I
was like, okay, ready, go. Didn't work.
But like that's something that you kind of have to tailor to your own inner being, right? So for me, like, I have a very, very strong imagination. Like if I close my eyes, I can imagine things in color, and I can imagine everything, right? Some people don't have that. Some people close their eyes, and if I say like imagine a banana, they can't do that, right? And so like you have to tailor it to whatever fits you specifically. But for me, like I'm able to do that, and so I was able to put those things in a box and keep them there. And I still do that to this day. Like if something's bothering me and I don't have time to think about it in that moment, I will sit there for take 5 to 10 seconds, imagine myself putting that stupid thing in the box and putting the box on whatever proverbial mind shelf that I have, and closing the door and walking away, right? Like that's how I keep myself centered in the moment. And it's hard, right? I can't always do it. There are going to be times where you aren't able to do that, or you don't have the capacity or the strength to do it. But like for you, that's kind of where we got into the whole journaling thing, right? Because that really helped you, and that's a version of that.
Well, that's how I started. Like in the beginning, when you're like, okay, picture you just putting it in a box, and I was like, okay, I'm one of those people who are like, I have the attention span of like a goldfish, and so it's just like, okay, I'm focused on it, but then it's just like, oh, completely not focused on it anymore. And so doing the journaling, sitting down, making it a habit, and doing that in the morning, right when you wake up, I found myself a little bit more motivated in the morning, just because at nighttime you're tired and you just want to sleep. And so in the morning I got to make it a habit, and I'd just do that, and I'd write it out, and I'd kind of give it to God, pray about it, and then that was it. I would not sit there trying to think about it. I wouldn't stress about it. It took some time. It was definitely not just like, okay, cool, wrote it down, done. No, definitely didn't work like that. It took weeks. But honestly, I'm still doing that to this day. It's just a part of my day that's been so powerful and so meaningful, in addition to that this meditation app that I found. My brother showed me it, It was this one's a Christian meditation app, and so it really helps with, it's kind of like a guided prayer type thing for me. That's really great because, I mean, I need like some direction when I'm doing that, or else my like goldfish brain just goes that way, and we're not focused on anything. And so, to see where I started, when you're like, okay, you just got to be mindful and mindful of how you're feeling, and how you feel, like how you feel when you're anxious, or how you feel when you're totally content and confident, and differentiating between the two, and being able to separate that, and find ways to get towards not feeling as anxious and everything was so hard for me. And so through the meditation, kind of just wiping everything away and doing that, I mean, I use that thing every single day, you know. And there's a number of apps out there, you know, that are non-religious meditation apps, and I'd recommend it. I mean, if you're like me and you're like you can't sit still because that's just the human that you are, there is meditation for you. So I mean, just give it a shot, you know, and be consistent with it. And I mean, it's changed my life. I can't even like tell you how much. And yeah, I mean, it's just so neat now, you know, doing that and practicing that, and just making it a habit has allowed me to do like what you said. Now I can kind of picture it, and picture me putting those in a box, or like in my analogy, kind of just giving them to God and being like, you know what, this is like, it's not for me to worry about, and you know, taking that weight off my shoulders. I understand what that means now, and it's not just like, Lindsay, I would love that. Ready to go. You know, it's been just night and day. But
well, with stuff like that, like consistency is always going to be key, right? Like I like to use the analogy, like Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Like you're not going to be perfect at doing something the first time you do it. And so for me, like it was easier to start out like putting it in a box initially, like, you know, I have the focus to be able to do that. And then turning it into like a mindfulness practice for me of like, I'll do it sometimes in the morning when I know that I'm facing like a really hard day. I'll wake up in the morning kind of like you do, and instead, like, it's really the heart of the practice is just getting it out, right? Expressing it in some way, whether that means like writing it down and, you know, giving it away that way, putting it in a box, giving it away that way, lighting it on proverbial fire.
I actually lit it on fire. That was kind of cool. It was just like,
yeah.
This is satisfying, but
like the overall goal is to just express it so that you can stop worrying about it. And you know, it's not going to be an instant like, okay, now I've written it down and it's gone forever. Like, it will come back. I kind of use the analogy sometimes of like, for me, I put those things in the box and the box becomes a boomerang, right? Like, I'll send it away, but then it'll come back later. And I can send it away as many different times as I possibly can. And sometimes the box will come back still filled with the stuff that I put that I put in it. But the overall thing is to put it in the box, write it down, and then let it go. You know, you're just letting it go for the time being, right? It'll come back probably, and if it does, let it go again. You know, take a moment if you're in the middle of your day and you're starting to worry about something that, you know, you'd written down earlier in the day or given away earlier in the day, and just take 5 seconds and do that again. 'Cause that's what I do. You know, if I'm at work or I'm just about to take a test and I'm worrying about something that I shouldn't be worrying about in that moment, I'll just take 5 to 10 seconds and give it away again. 'Cause you can do that as many times as you want.
Well, yeah, and it's nice you say that, because I actually listened to something today. It was talking about like things like that, and kind of going in these moments of silence and solitude, kind of like with the meditation, and how hard it is to do that in today's day and age. But with that, I mean, they said start with where you're at and not where you think you should be. So for me, it was just like, okay, meditation, I know it works. So if I can sit there and meditate for 30 minutes, I'll be fine. 30 minutes was like an eternity to me. I couldn't even sit still for like 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So starting out like the app that I use, the Abide app, I mean, it's got minutes, it's got seconds, it's got 10, 15, 20-minute, long messages and everything, or little like guided meditations. And so just starting out with the small ones, just trying to, like, that was huge for me. Like you said, the consistency, I just started out small, what I could do. If it was 5 seconds one day, I'd try to maybe bump it to 10 the next day. And from there, it was just like super great, and it was just life changing. So it is possible. But yeah, I mean, that is pretty much the story. I mean, we can go into detail forever.
Oh,
I feel like we don't want to,
I could talk for
we don't want to just blast
so
your
long.
day and have a 3-hour podcast that you're listening to. But although we do plan on, mentioning and talking about what we did, how we did, and really helping you guys in future episodes. But now, I mean, I think it's a good time. We should probably introduce Frank, huh?
Yeah, we probably should.
Definitely think that's probably what most of you guys are like. All right, let's get to the point here. So I'm sure most of you are wondering, Frank Disconnect. Why the podcast is The Disconnect, and Frank, who the heck is Frank? Is it just a random name, And it's kind of funny how things panned out, and how we fell upon this word. And so it's this idea of giving your anxiety a name. So like we've talked about, Lindsay puts it in a box, I write it on the paper. We're putting that anxiety, we're separating it from ourselves, acknowledging that it's something aside from ourselves, okay? And in this sense, we're giving it a name.
Mm-hmm. So in essence, it's kind of like you're taking your anxiety and you're giving it a physical form, right? And so for some people, it helps to turn it into a person, and so like that's kind of where the whole Frank came from. So when you turn it into a person, you have to give it a name, right? You could call it Jim, you could call it Bob, you could call it Tammy, you could call it Jenny. And so when we were kind of talking one day about this concept of giving your anxiety a name, we thought it would be funny to name it Frank, because like we had originally decided to call the podcast The Disconnect because of how, as you know in the introduction, anxiety disconnects you from who you think you are, right? How you feel normally. And so with the whole concept of Frank, we just kind of chose a name out of a hat, and then it kind of rolled with a Frank disconnect, like a sudden disconnect, which ties into the whole anxiety thing. And then later, once we started looking up the etymology of the name Frank, it actually means free one. It has a French origin, and it means free one. And so that was very fitting for this whole idea of giving your anxiety an embodiment and setting it free, right? So you give it a name, you give it an identity, and then you set it free, right? It can go do whatever it wants. And so there's that idea of just setting it free. And so that's kind of what Austin does with his journaling. That's what I do with my weird box thing.
We found some research online. Julie Levin, a therapist, mentions how helpful it is to externalize your anxiety. And so by seeing it as something separate from your essential self, for me in that moment when I was sitting there trying to figure out the why, the what I did to do this, or how I caused this, and how something I've done so many times before I literally could not do, like I was starting to blame myself. I lost my confidence in myself. And so doing things like this and really externalizing it gives it not only like gives it less power, but it's, I don't know, it's just, it's so nice to see, okay, Frank, you're coming with me today, but you're not going to, I'm me, you're in the back seat. Like, that's how this rolls. You know, and it's so powerful to do that. It might sound crazy right now, but I would just recommend trying it. You wake up today and you get in your car and you're going to work. You buckle up and you're like, all right, Frank, don't care if you're buckled or not, because, you know, I don't care about you. You're here. You acknowledge it. It's good to acknowledge it. You don't want to ignore it, but acknowledging it's there and it's separate from yourself is you taking one step in the right direction towards gaining control and getting a better grip on that anxiety. And so that is where this idea of frank disconnect comes from. And so throughout the show and everything, like, we'll kind of be referring back to Frank and as this entity and this identity of how we refer to our anxiety. And yeah, I mean, it kind of flows perfectly into the quote of the episode today. As you know, we'd like to end each episode with a quote. And this quote comes from a book that I just finished reading. It's called When God Winks at You. And so the quote itself is, but the nice thing about valleys is that there's an end to them. No matter how dark it seems, there's a time when it will end and you will break into sunshine. And that is the concept that you need to hang on to, that there is an end to terrible times, to the feelings of loss of control, and to the total absence of suitable remedies. I read this and I was like, I feel attacked. Like, this is speaking to me, through me, and at me. And oh man, you guys, I cannot fathom how true this statement is. And I mean, like we said, like, there's a light at the end of the times, and I mean, that just leads us to this point. You know, we've gone through the valleys. We've both had our individual times where we were at the lowest points of our life, and it seemed like we were never going to crawl back up, you know, and it was so debilitating. But there does come a time where you'll break into that sunshine. And like I said, for me, I kept feeling like in those moments when I was journaling and praying, I felt like kind of like God was telling me that there's this breakthrough coming. I couldn't tell what it was. I was like, there's me again, like the impatience kicking in. I'm like, okay, so what is it? Is it happening now? You know, and it was just like, just waiting, you know. And truth of the matter is, the breakthrough is this podcast. It's something that Lindsay and I were having these conversations every single day to help me at the time, but also ultimately help her as well to kind of get through these stages of life and everything. And we decided to turn that into a podcast. And for those of you who, wherever stage you're at, whether you're in the beginning stage, the middle stage, the crisis stage, wherever you're at, you know, I mean, I know exactly how it felt to be looked in the eye and told, hey, it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks. Or in the middle of my crisis, I couldn't get help for 3 to 4 weeks, you know, and that is a crisis that we are dealing with as a nation right now. And we just wanted to create this podcast as just another resource or something that is available to you guys through a number of different platforms that you can utilize. You can reach out to us. You can ask us questions, or, you know, shoot us an email, whatever it may be. And we want to help you as much as we can. Obviously, I mean, we're not licensed therapists. We're not anything like that, but we're two people who have struggled with this and been in the face of this. And we'd love nothing more than to just help you out and be able to assist you instead of just being told, hey, it's going to be at least 6 to 8 weeks, I'm sorry, and then turned away at the door. You know, that doesn't help. It didn't help me. And I mean, we wouldn't want that for you guys. And that's our why.
And I think, like, it really goes back to kind of what I was talking about before with Austin, is like, I knew what he was feeling, even though, like, our stories are so different and the reason why we were experiencing these things were so different. It's still the same feeling at the end of the day, right? Like, anxiety will manifest differently, but, like, it's still, it's more or less the same, right? So, like, for me, like being able to find that common ground with Austin and being able to share with him my experiences and being able to really share what I had learned, and being able to really see like the positive impact that had made on him was really good. Like it also helped me reflect on how far I'd personally come, because now I was able to take all of these, really traumatic things that I'd found ways to cope with through one form of coping mechanism or another, and do some positive and do some positive good with it, because like it's so easy to kind of hold all of that to yourself and kind of hold it all internally and not be able to be able to reflect on it. And so it was good to have those conversations with you and to have that time at the coffee shop to really share with you my experience. And when you initially suggested that we do the podcast, like I was on board with it, because like there's such a potential for good that we can do with it. And really helping people know that like you're not alone in this experience. You're not to like disingenuize anybody's feelings, but like you're not the first person to go through this, and you won't be the last either. And so like being able to go through those experiences, you might be able to help somebody in the future, right? Like the strength that you're learning now in whatever stage of your journey that you're in, maybe the reason why you're learning that is so that you can help somebody else in the future. And so that's really what drew me into agreeing to do the podcast, is because I want to be able to help people through those moments. And to be able to share like my experience and to offer some perspective of like, I made it through this and I believe in you that you can make it through this too. And so that's really where we are in with the podcast. Because like that quote said, like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and we just hope that we can help you find it, or at least be there for you with that journey to support you so that you can find the light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah. So if there's any quotes that you guys like, please, we'd love it if you'd share them with us. We'd also love to hear your story. I mean, you guys heard it today. I mean, we just wanted to be upfront and real with you and tell you why it is that we're doing this. And so we'd love to hear your story, kind of, what's going on in your life. And so go ahead and DM us on Instagram or Twitter at Frank Disconnect. We're excited to get to know you all. Again, we do have that email for you guys to email, askfrank@frankdisconnect.com. And then something new we just started. We wanted to get out there and tell you guys our story and why it is that we are doing this. And I mean, with that, I think you can agree. I mean, this is true. The last couple of months that we've been doing this and getting this in the works, it's truly become my passion. It's something I enjoy doing, and it's incredible to see how you can take something so dark, twisted, and seeming like it's never going to end and turn it into something positive. And that's really what this podcast is. It's truly that light at the end of the tunnel, and this is something that we are super passionate about. And so with that, I mean, we decided to start a Patreon. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's simply something where if this podcast or this stuff that we're doing, if this is something that you would support, or this is something that you really want to kind of get engaged in and get involved with and support a good cause, it's basically a way for you to donate every month. And so how it works is there's different tiers. Right now we just have 3 simple tiers. You can check them out. And essentially what it does, you guys, I mean, right now, us working full-time and doing the master's program, I mean, time is very limited and resources are limited. And so, I mean, as is right now, we love producing the content. We love getting it out there. But, just as even the smallest donation, of $1 a month, that helps us out a ton. That helps us to be able to produce more content, to be more engaged and more active on social media, and to ultimately, we now that we've introduced Frank, we have some exciting plans for merch and stuff coming soon. With that, like, if you subscribe to our, well, not subscribe, if you sign up to be on our tier 1, is it Patreon, tier 1, however that works?
Yeah, it's like the first tier of our Patreon, which we have decided to call Frank's Pals. It's $1 a month, and we actually have a special offer going on right now for anybody who signs up for any of our tiers. You'll actually get a custom Frank Disconnect sticker, and so that'll be super cool. But the tiers are called Frank's Pals, which is $1 a month, Frank's Friends, which is $3 a month, and then Frank's Best Friends, which is a $5 a month. So they each come with their own individual perks for donating. So go on ahead and head on out to patreon.com/Frank Disconnect, all one word. And check those out. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. I think there's like a message us feature on the Patreon. So if you have any questions about anything, let us know. But yeah, go ahead and check out those Patreon tiers.
Lastly, guys, go ahead and follow us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, whatever platform you're listening on. We'd also love it if you'd leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the podcast, and really help us to spread this word, increase the awareness. But that's all for today's episode. We really appreciate you guys staying, through the whole episode and listening. I know it was a long one, but we just wanted to pour out, our hearts to you guys and show why it is we're doing this. And so yeah, we wanted to thank you. We're excited for this, and yeah, that's pretty much what's going on with us right now. We're super stoked and excited for it. So with that, we appreciate it, and tune in next time for another episode of The Disconnect.